Fuck HIPAA. My new patient is the vilest man I've ever met.
Disclaimer, the content presented in this video is purely fictional and intended for entertainment purposes only.
The Dust Bowl has the unfortunate distinction of being the worst man-made disaster in the history of the United States. The devastation is difficult to comprehend. Tragic effects included the large-scale collapse of the farming industry, mass migration, and catastrophic food shortages. Many counties lost every single farm, but in 1935, one of those lost farms regenerated seemingly overnight. It started with enormous dandelions the size of human hands, followed by wild onions and blackberry thickets. Fields of potatoes, carrots, fruit trees, and corn followed in rapid succession. Each of these crops was unnaturally large. For example, the corn stalks alone measured 25 feet high on average. Reportedly, the yields on these crops were addictively delicious. Astonishingly, the crops grew so quickly that anything eaten regenerated overnight. It was, in essence, an infinite food glitch in the middle of a famine. The farmer, an unusually young man identified as M. Hare, freely distributed this food to his neighbors. Multiple families returned to the area, along with dozens and dozens of desperate orphans and abandoned children, to take advantage of this miracle. But the miracle was soon overshadowed by a horrific discovery. The farmer was a murderer who buried the remains of his victims in his fields. The details of Mr. Hare's crimes reportedly rendered even the most experienced investigators physically ill. And the vast majority of these details were never officially made public. However, the following information was released: Mr. Hare was a violent predator in every way imaginable. His preferred victim profile was remarkably consistent given the limited selection inherent in a heavily depopulated rural area. The remains of 27 victims were eventually recovered from his farm. Most of the remains belonged to minors. It seems astonishing that Mr. Hare and his monstrous crimes fell into obscurity. However, it should be noted that his crimes occurred in the midst of the greatest ecological and humanitarian disaster in the United States. Complicating the matter was a coordinated effort by the inhabitants of his county to strike his name from the record. To this end, these same inhabitants lynched and buried him. Within hours of his death, all of his miraculous crops died. Approximately 2 months later, however, a spat of child disappearances plagued an area several counties over. Shortly after these disappearances, a crop of excessively large dandelions sprouted in a barren field. As the number of disappearances grew, so did the crops in the fields. Once again, the townspeople found themselves gorging on ripe fruits and vegetables. Before history could repeat itself fully, an aid worker stumbled upon a particular bizarre situation that prompted him to make a report. The eventual result of that report was a request made to the Agency of Helping Hands. The perpetrator was located during the commission of yet another murder. It was too late to save the victim, but the killer was in an extremely sluggish state and therefore easy to take into custody. Despite significant ongoing efforts for the last 90 years, the inmate has proved impervious to destruction by both conventional and unconventional means. The inmate possesses 2 talents of interest to the agency: the aforementioned infinite food glitch, which the agency has successfully replicated without need of human remains, and his ability to pass back and forth between a small, extradimensional plane that he calls the Land of Always Spring. The nature and properties of this plane remain under active investigation. It should be noted that investigation cannot occur without the cooperation of the inmate. It should also be noted that the inmate has been used to grow a substantial amount of food that is currently used to feed other inmates. Access to the Land of Always Spring is integral to food production. This benefit will no longer be available once the inmate is successfully terminated. The interviewers would like to note their disgust that such a consideration is even a factor. Interview subject: the March Hare, classification string, cooperative/indestructible/chthonic/constant/severe/demon. Interviewers: Rochelle B. Michael W. Interview date: January 8, 25. I was a very hungry boy. As I got older, I only got hungrier, but I never got to eat. There were 8 of us. We all were hungry, but I was the hungriest because I was the only child who did not belong to the monster in the house. The monster owned a farm, which is why my mother married him. She grew up hungry, too. destitute and hungry in a cold, bleak city. She believed her children would always eat as long as she had a farm. She was wrong. The monster's farm and all the other farms dried up and blew away during the drought. The soil, the crops, the earth itself turned to dust. The dust got everywhere. In our clothes, our eyes, our hair, our mouths and ears and noses, our very pores, it got everywhere and filled everything except our bellies. But even before the farm dried up and blew away, I was hungry because the monster in the house hated me. I hated him more. I hated my mother most for marrying him. I didn't hate their children. I didn't love them, but they loved me. I loved that. They loved when I hugged them. They loved when I played with them. They loved when I shook the dust out of their hair. They loved my stories. All my stories were based on my dreams. Mostly I dreamed of fertile fields and sweet fruits and rich, earthy vegetables. Fresh corn and sugar peas and autumn apples picked a little too early so they were crisp and tart. Food as far as the eye could see, more food than anyone could ever eat, food that never spoiled, never rotted, never turned into dust and blew away. Sometimes I dreamed of smashing their father's face until his bones caved under my fists and his blood bathed my hands, but I didn't tell them about those dreams. That would scare them. No one can love you when you scare them, and I needed them to love me. I loved that they loved me. The only other thing I loved was my stuffed rabbit. My grandmother gave him to me before mother and I went to live with the monster on his farm. My rabbit was the only comfort in my life. I had to hide him because the monster despised him. He told me to throw him away. Instead, I hid him under the floor and only brought him out at night. By the moonlight I stroked his threadbare face and the stained silk lining in his ears. I pretended that he spoke and told me stories, just like I told the monster's children stories. The stories my rabbit told were of the land of always spring, where wild fruits and vegetables grew as far as the eye could see. Where clear clean streams kept the soil heavy, dark, and damp so that it would never blow away. A land where no one was ever hungry, not even me. When the monster found out I still had my rabbit, he grabbed him from my arms and tore him apart, then left his pieces on the floor. I cried over those pieces until his sawdust stuffing and his velvet fur were dripping with my tears. Then I picked up those sopping pieces and carried them to the only tree that hadn't dried up and blown away. I buried them under the raised roots. It wasn't the land of always spring. It wasn't a burrow. It wasn't even a grave. But it was the only place I could put him. I had nightmares every night of him turning to dust and blowing away. Sometimes I had nightmares of the monster in the house finding his pieces and throwing them into the wind. I visited my rabbit every day to make sure he was still there. Sometimes my youngest sister came. She loved me best, and held my hand while I cried. She was understanding. Always so understanding. The neighbor boys were less understanding. Nosy, nasty little shits, they followed me to the grave once. I refused to tell them what I was doing, so they found out for themselves. The next day, I arrived to find them tossing my rabbit's pieces back and forth between them. I hit the older one with everything I had. The impact was euphoria. I exulted in the crunch of bone under my fists, in the spray of blood on my hands and the slippery heat of it, in the agonized scream of the boy as I hit again and again and again. Blood splattered my hands, my face, my clothes, my sister, the empty pieces of my rabbit, and the roots of the tree. For the first in years, my belly felt full. When the boys finally stumbled away, I gathered up the pieces of my rabbit, dripping again, but with blood instead of tears, and tucked them back under the roots. I got beaten within an inch of my life for what I did to that boy. The pain was horrendous. The terror was worse, but it was exquisite, too, because within that pain and terror was the memory of that boy's pain and terror. My pain reminded me of how it felt when his nose crunched under my hand and his blood sprayed all across my face, burning hot and living and beautiful. With those memories in my head and in my skin, I couldn't scream, I could only smile. Those boys taught me that it wasn't safe to visit my rabbit in the daytime. I only went at night, on the 9th night after my beating, when I reached under the roots to pick up his pieces. I touched something alive, there, in the darkness beneath the tree. I saw eyes. Flat, shining eyes. "Hello, March," it said in a scratchy, shivery voice. "Sorry it took so long to wake up." It shifted. Eyes flickered. Something thumped. I saw hints of silk-lined ears and threadbare velvet fur. I leaned in. "Are you my rabbit?" "I'm your hair." Its breath smelled like tears and sawdust and something foul. "And I'm alive." That made me cry. I was glad my rabbit was all right, but if it was alive, did that mean it felt the pain when it was torn apart? "No," it said. "I wasn't alive then. I've only been alive for 9 days, March, and unless you do something quick, I won't be alive for 9 more." I don't remember everything it told me. I remember its eyes, and the way the moonlight made its silk ears shine. And I remember its teeth. I just don't remember all of its words. "I think that's for the best." It said I'd brought it back to life with love, tears, and blood. That's how everything comes to life: love, tears, and blood, but there was a catch. Because I'd brought him back to life, we were the same now. Separate but together. 2 parts of a whole. If I felt something, he felt something. If I was hungry, he was hungry, and we were both hungrier than hell. I was used to being hungry, but I didn't want anyone else to be hungry. Especially not my hair. The idea of my dear stuffed rabbit being hungry was too much. And I cried again. "Don't cry, March, just listen. We're the same. We're each other. If you're hungry, I'm hungry. If I starve, you starve. If you die, I die. You have to keep me from starving so that I can keep you from dying." "I got nothing to feed you with," I said. The farm turned to dust and blew away. There's no fruits or vegetables. It was true. No fresh corn or sugar peas, no autumn apples picked a little too early to make sure they were crisp and tart. There's not even grass anymore. Nothing grows here. I grow. I always grow. And I don't eat vegetables or fruits or grass. But you're a hare. I'm the hare. What difference does that make? All the difference in the world. Look at my teeth." He gave a smile. Glistening teeth, long and curved and stained, glimmering in the bony moonlight. "Are these teeth for fruits and vegetables?" The sight of those teeth made me want to cry again. It made butterflies and fleas and sick little birds take flight in my guts, battering their poor little bodies against my ribcage until they died and fell, settling into drifts like heavy winter snows. I hate winter. I hate snow. I imagined those drifts melting away. Once they were melted, memories rose up like steam. Delicious memories of agonized screams and the ghostly sensation of noses smashing, of blood spurting hot and vital against my skin. I asked, "What do you eat?" "Hair." That smile again. Those sharp teeth dark as sin and white as moon. I started by feeding him small things. Innocent things, but even the smallest were too big for Mr. Hare. He made me take them apart into tiny pieces. This disturbed me at first, but not for long. Soon I grew to like it, even to anticipate it. The feel of living things coming apart in my hands, coming apart because I made them, because I inflicted myself upon them, was not quite as sweet as the feel of bone and teeth and blood against my skin, but it was close. I grew to want it. Sometimes I inflicted myself on them for no reason except my own wanting. Half of these things the hare had no need of, but I had need of how they felt in my hands. The hare ate, and he grew, so did I. My growing made the monster in my house angry. How should I grow taller and stronger when he withered and his sons shrank? How should I, who ate less than all the rest, become tall and strong while the rest of them dwindled into bone and dusty skin? He decided I was stealing food. When Mother spoke in my defense, reminding him that every crumb and kernel was accounted for 1,000 times over, that there was no way I'd even sniffed something I wasn't supposed to eat, he lashed out. She never defended me again. That night I dreamed of his nose crunching and his blood spurting. I dreamed of smashing him into a pulp, and smashing the pulp into a flood that I flopped in like a dying fish. As if he read my mind, he threw me out of the house the next day and told me to never come back. I pretended to vanish into the sandy, ruined plains, then circled back for my hair, but he would not come out. Why would I leave? He asked me. And why would you? Come in and look at all we have. I crawled in, feeling stupid as hell, but I didn't feel stupid for long. The tiny space under the roots was enormous. It was an earthen cavern with a tiny window, so tiny it was no more than a keyhole, at the end. Light bled through, pure and pale as the springtime sun. What's out there? I asked. The hare smiled. I smelled his breath, tears, sawdust, rot. Come see. He grabbed my hand in his paw. It felt huge, bigger than the hand of the monster in the house. That made no sense. My hair was small. So very small. He led me to the tiny window and said, "This is the land of always spring." It was marvelous, fields and meadows threaded with clear spring water glimmering in the clean pale sunlight, orchards, fruit trees and vegetable patches and brightest green grasses and dandelions like tiny glowing suns, stretching as far as the eye could see. My mouth watered. I want to go in. You can't. You'll never fit. The door is too small even for me. How do we make it bigger? By eating, of course. I don't know where of course came into it, but I do know I had never wanted anything more, so I continued to hunt for small, innocent things. I never ate them myself. I didn't need to. I took my pleasure from the taking apart. The pleasure filled me more than food ever had. I only fed them to the hare. It was much better that way. The hare was much smaller and needed much less. Because we were one, what filled the hare's stomach filled mine, and even though I never ate, even though I only ever fed the hare, I kept on growing. So did the door to always spring. The keyhole swelled until I could fit a hand through to rest my fingers on lush grass and sweet clover softer than carpet. Softer than a girl's skin. Touching it was bliss that I had never known. Just out of reach of my fingertips was a fat nodding dandelion quivering in the cool breeze. Every night, instead of dreaming of smashing the monster's face in and luxuriating in his blood, I dreamed of always spring. Every day, I hunted small innocent things for the hare. One morning, the monster in the house caught me hunting. He saw how big and strong I'd become. A smart man would back away, especially one as withered and sunbitten as him. A smarter man would ask me to help him grow. Instead he attacked me for stealing food from him, his sons and daughters, from starving old men and ragged little boys and bony little girls and their dying mothers. He was withered and weak, but he was still the monster, so I was afraid. I fell to my knees. The dead dreadful dust stung my eyes and coated my throat as his blows rained down, but I couldn't help but notice how weak he was, how frail. A monster still, but old, and weak. When he struck me again, I struck back, knocking him to the ground. Then I made my dreams come true. I smashed his nose. The first spray of his monster blood brought me to rapture, the second made me laugh, the third made me grow. Strength wound through me like roots and took hold, growing itself and growing me. His blood watered me the way rain used to water the ground before it dried up and blew away, but I would not dry up and blow away. I had roots. I had blood, hot and slick and rich. The feeling of him smashing open against my skin, of his blood spouting and spurting, of his skull collapsing, gave me joy that I had never known. It was the first joy of many. When he could do nothing but whimper through his splintered teeth and the caved-in ruin of his head, I dragged him to the lair of the March hare. If touching his blood had made me grow, then eating him would surely make the hare grow. The doorway to always spring would grow, too. The hare wasn't happy. He isn't small or innocent. How am I supposed to eat him? In pieces, like always, I said. I don't want his pieces. They're big and they're full of sin. I was angry. So angry that I wanted to smash in the face of my hare and luxuriate in his sawdust blood and the threadbare velvet of his skin. Instead, I dragged the monster to the tiny doorway that looked out on always spring. The little beam of pale sun made his ruined face look so awful my stomach churned, but then it made me laugh. Some of his blood dripped through the little window. As soon as it touched that jewel-bright grass, it withered and died. That's what happens when you eat something big and full of sin, said the hare. Immediately I dragged his body outside the tree and worked as dusk fell. It was much harder to break him into pieces because he wasn't small or innocent. But it was also more fun to break down a big monster than a small, innocent thing. There was much more blood. It pooled up and spread deliberately, almost curiously, as though it had a mind of its own and was both relieved and troubled to be free of him. It turned the dust underneath his body to thick, rich mud, even when the blood ran out, tearing him apart in just the right way, in just the right place, made it geyser again. Too soon, even the geysers weakened to trickles. That disappointed me. But that wasn't the end. There were still many bones to smash and splinter, such tactile pleasures under my hands slippery with old blood. When I was done, I licked his blood off my hands and immediately spat it out. Gagging. I had already learned that new blood is rich and coppery sweet. That day I learned that old blood is bitter. That was a disappointment, but better to learn it early than late. As dusk fell, I slathered the bloody dust mud on my skin. The dust was so fine and the blood so thick that it dried strangely, like hairs or fur. I lay beside the butchered body of the monster as the moon rose and the hare complained of hunger. I didn't care, because I wasn't hungry. For the first time in my life, I felt truly, wholly full. When the hare accepted that I would do no more hunting that night, he slid out into the shadows. His eyes and teeth shone, he ate, he grimaced and gagged. Complaining about oldness and bigness and age and sin, but he ate it all. With each bite he swallowed, I felt lighter. Freer, and when the last scrap of the monster in my house vanished down the hare's threadbare throat, I felt safe. I hadn't felt safe since I left the city for the monster's farm. Not since my grandmother placed the stuffed rabbit in my arms. The hare and I went back under the roots of the tree and I saw that the door to Always Spring had grown large enough to fit my arm. The patch of grass killed by the monster's blood made me feel sick, so I didn't look at it. I reached past and plucked the dandelion that had hovered tantalizingly beyond my reach, and ate it. The milkiness inside exploded rich and bitter on my tongue. The blossom was even more delicious and greenly fresh, soft petals crunchy with tiny glittering beetles. The moment I swallowed, I felt 10 times hungrier than I'd ever felt. I wanted more, I needed more dandelions, more than I had ever needed anything. More than I wanted safety. More than I wanted my hair. More than I wanted to feel fresh blood exploding and hard bone caving under my hands, but I couldn't reach the rest. A cluster lay just beyond my reach, bright and lush and taunting me the way the monster in my house used to taunt me. How he held carrots and apples and heels of bread just beyond my reach. I reached for the dandelions, clawing up the grass and dark moist soil, churning jewel-bright earthworms to the surface. I tore my own skin trying to squeeze my arm through. My own slippery blood eased the friction for a moment or two, and I was able to slide my arm a few inches further, until my gore-caked fingernails, gleaming so brightly in the springtime sun, brushed the nearest flower. Just barely brushed it, it was still too far away. The hare finally stopped me. He eased me back into the cavern, making gentle noises as I pulled my half-skinned arm back through the doorway. Be patient, he soothed. The door will get bigger the more we eat. I despaired. If something as big as the monster only expanded the doorway from a keyhole to a rat hole. How much more would it take? I don't know. Let's find out together. And from now on, make sure we only eat small, innocent things. The animals are almost gone, I said. I'm not talking about animals, March. We're both too big for that now. That night I dreamed of dandelions and fruit trees and clear clean stream water so cold it stung my teeth. When I woke up, I went hunting. When the dried up farms blew away, they left death behind. Dead mothers, dead fathers, dead brothers and sisters. The ones who survived didn't last long. Even if they found food or water, the dust got into their lungs and killed them that way, but it killed them slowly. Anyone dying slowly was easy to find. and easier to lure. Dying things wanted to trust me. They wanted a big kid to take charge. There were a lot of them. I picked one. I didn't like it, especially not after the ecstasy of what I'd done to the monster. The blood felt good, the caving bone too, but nothing else did. There was no satisfaction. No fullness. My belly felt hollow and empty as the hungriest day I ever spent on the farm. After I fed the hare that particular small, innocent thing, I told him that I'd never do it again, then I'll starve. If I starve, you starve. If we starve, we'll never live in the fresh green spring. I dreamed of always spring that night, and went back out in the morning to pick a second small, innocent thing. When I brought this second thing to the hare's tree, the thing cried. That was the hare's fault. The first small, innocent thing had worn an old brown hat. That same hat lay, blood-stained and ragged, in front of the roots. That made it hard to get the second thing under the tree, but I managed. Once I managed, I took it apart. There was no satisfaction, not really. When I was done, the hare asked me to dress him in the thing's clothes. I was revolted, but I didn't dare say no. Not with his teeth shining in the shadows, or with his flat bright eyes looking into mine. Once he was dressed, he smiled even bigger and ate. When he was done, the window was big enough that I could fit my arm through enough to reach another dandelion. I popped it into my mouth. I nearly collapsed under the weight of untold, unknown pleasure, suffocated by ecstasy. That's how it's supposed to feel when you eat, said the hare. It's how I feel when I eat. And it's how others will feel if they eat you. What's going to eat me? But looking across the tree root cavern at the hare's bright eyes and sharp teeth, I could think of at least one thing that would eat me. Anything stronger than you can eat you. You have to grow and become stronger and stronger so that nothing can ever eat you. The way to do that is by feeding me. So I kept feeding the hare. I liked to smash bones. I luxuriated in blood. I luxuriated in other things too. But I didn't ever eat any of it. I don't know why. I wish I had. One of the things I fed the hare was my mother. She was my favorite to take apart. Her blood was sweetest, and her bones felt the best under my hands. When her blood leaked through the door to Always Spring, the grass grew 5 feet high and the dandelions grew bigger than my fist. When the hare had eaten, he fell asleep. I threw the leftovers through the door, delighting in the way the grass grew and the flowers exploded wherever they landed. While the hare slept, the door to Always Spring grew until I could fit both my arms and my head through. I grasped handfuls of dandelions, bright and glittering with beetles, pale roots clung with soil, and shoved them all into my mouth. I think the pleasure nearly killed me. The pleasure was worth the hunger. Every time I took a bite, I was 10 times, 20 times, 100 times hungrier than I had ever been on the farm. The pleasure outweighed the hunger. No, the pleasure was in the hunger. It would have been nice to die with ecstasy in my mouth and sticky blood drying on my arms, but when I plucked the last dandelion, I didn't eat it. I stared at it, blood-stained and soggy in my palm. Then I took it outside and buried it on the edge of the dead dusty cornfield. Then I went back inside and slept. When I woke, the field was full of fat, radiant dandelions. Bright green and brighter yellow. Petals crawling with beetles. I ate my fill, then I went hunting, but there were no more small, innocent things. Too many families had migrated out. Those that were left knew not to trust a certain young man in the area. Even though I hunted all day and half the night, I found nothing. The hare got hungry. Because he and I are the same, so did I prowled for anything and everything. Weeds, insects, skinny birds and starving ground squirrels. I'd come full circle to the smallest of the small and the most innocent of the innocent again, but the hare was far too big for them now. It was like feeding crumbs to the monster in my house. I even gave him the dandelions grown from my mother's blood and tears. He didn't want to eat those, but other people did. I caught many people who knew not to trust me in my dandelion fields. Yes, fields. The single dandelion grew into a field, and that field grew into 3. I let them eat my dandelions. Letting them eat my dandelions made them trust me. Once they trusted me, they no longer feared me. That's important. Something that fears you can't love you. I needed them to love me. Once they loved me, I lured them to the March hare. Not all of them, and certainly not as many as he wanted to eat, but enough to make the door grow. It grew enough that I could fit my shoulders through and stretched to reach wild onions and blackberry thickets. I picked those. I dipped them in the blood of small, innocent things, and then I planted them. They grew beyond anyone's imagination. Soon, people began to move back. They begged and bartered for my food. I gave it freely. Or rather, I made them believe I gave it freely. I was just exchanging food they wanted for food I wanted. Fruits and onions that made them feel full in exchange for delicate bones and hot, spurting blood that made me feel full. I think they knew, but they didn't want to know. That suited me just fine. What didn't suit me fine was how the March hare grew tired of these strangers and orphans and tiny toddler burdens. What didn't suit me fine was how he watched my brothers and sisters as they ate blackberries and dandelions alongside the strangers. And because the hare and I are the same, I watched them too. I stopped dreaming of always spring, and started to dream of my brothers and sisters. Dreams of their bones crushing and their slippery blood flooding. I always woke from these dreams crying in horror, but full of anticipation. And hungry, so very, very hungry. I started to wonder if it would be such a bad thing to starve, especially if the hare starved with me. One afternoon, 2 women from the Ladies' Aid Society came for food donations. One was very young. So young she wasn't even a lady yet. Not even close. I knew the hare would like her. I hoped he'd like her enough to stop looking at my brothers and sisters. I got rid of the older one and brought the young one to the lair. The hare enjoyed her very much. I enjoyed the way the door to Always Spring expanded. I enjoyed how I could squeeze my body through down to my hips and reach handfuls of sweet rich dandelions grown to enormous size by my mother's pieces. They were still the best dandelions, better even than the ones grown out in the fields. I enjoyed eating my fill of them and of her. They made me horrendously, incurably hungry, but the hunger was exquisite. As soon as that thought crossed my mind, I felt guilty, and as the guilt ate me alive, the door to Always Spring shrank. I barely squirmed out in time before the contraction cut me in half. What happened? I screamed at the hare. I'm hungry, he moaned in his scratchy, shivery voice. I just fed you. I fed you the youngest, smallest, most innocent thing I could find. No, he said. You didn't. And then he looked out of his burrow, towards the verdant fields where my brothers and sisters played. No, I said, and left. I went out to the fields to play with my brothers and sisters. As my youngest sister smiled at me, I decided it would good to starve. To surrender myself to exquisite hunger. The decision didn't last long, and I went back to March hare to beg. Only after I crawled inside his lair did I realize that my littlest sister had followed. The hare slithered forward to meet us. Darker than the dark except for his shining teeth. I didn't like that. Not one bit. My sister did. She said, "Aren't you so cute? Even your teeth." I reached through the door to Always Spring while they spoke, picking clover and dandelions. I meant to eat them, but for once they didn't make my mouth water. The thought of putting them into my mouth made me sick. Instead of eating them, I wound them into a little bracelet and put it on my sister's wrist. They're so pretty, March. She said. Can I go pick my own? Before I could get a word in, the hare said, "Of course, sweetheart." Then he took her hand in his big dirty paw and led her through the door to Always Spring. She was so small she could squeeze through. The moment her kicking feet vanished, I hated her for getting to go inside Always Spring before me. That hate grew as her thumping footsteps and happy screams drifted through the door. I hated her desperately for being able to fit through the window, for being able to eat not just dandelions but sweet corn, sugar peas and tart autumn apples. All the things I couldn't reach. All the things I'd never been allowed to reach. All the things I still wasn't allowed to reach. I was so busy hating her that I didn't notice when her noises stopped. It was dark by then. I wondered how long I'd been busy hating. Hours at least. Hours in which I'd left her to the mercy of the March hare. I crawled to the door to always spring and looked through. A single beam of pale spring sunlight lanced across my face. Green fields and orchards shone like heaven. I didn't see her anywhere, but with an awful chill, I noticed that the door had grown again. It was big enough that I could squeeze my shoulders through again. I squirmed through and came face to face with a mound of dark, fresh earth. It was coated in the thickest, greenest grass I've ever seen. Even more grass sprouted in real time right before my eyes. Among the grass I saw seedlings and tiny sprouts of trees. The mound crumbled. Rich dark curds of damp soil pattered through the growing grass. I looked up and saw feet. I tracked those feet upward to strange, threadbare legs, from those legs to a body, from the body to a face. It was my March hare. The very first time I'd seen it in full light, with horror so powerful it bordered on euphoria, I realized I'd made a grave mistake. The hare shifted, large feet sinking into the mound. More crumbling earth cascaded through the growing grass, bearing a small pale hand ringed in a dandelion bracelet. I squirmed backward. The hare came after me. Worse, he brought what was left of my sister. She still had the dandelion bracelet, but no eyes. Crumbles of dark soil fell from her empty, bleeding sockets. I fled past my verdant fields and across the dusty plains. Screaming. I was a little boy again. A little, weak, terribly hungry boy. No longer strong. No longer a monster. Only weak prey running from something much stronger that wanted to eat me. It caught me. Why are you running? I'm afraid. I screamed. Why? I'm you, and you're me. I did not want that. Not anymore. I was willing to kill myself if it meant I didn't have to be the hare. If you don't feed me, I starve. If I starve, you starve. I thought of my sister's eyeless face, and decided starving was just fine. If I don't eat, you get weak. If you get weak, something else will eat you. I was willing to be eaten. When you're weak, something else will eat you and the ecstasy of eating will be theirs and never yours again. This was not acceptable. I had never had any comforts. No pleasures. No loves, no joys, no happiness except taking things apart and feeling their bones give under my hands and luxuriating in their hot bursts of blood. They were the only things that truly made me feel full, but I had grown up hungry. I could live hungry. I could die hungry, but I just could not stomach the thought of making something else full, not me, a little boy who grew up so hungry. A little boy who did not even understand what it meant to feel full. I still am not full. I have never been full. I will never be full. I don't ever want to be full. I love to be hungry. I love hungering for dandelions and rich earthy vegetables. And sweet fruits and the feel of bone caving under my hands and the steaming spurting flood of blood over my skin and on my tongue. I love to taste the dandelions and the vegetables and fruits and shattered bone and rich, sweet blood. To truly love tastes, you have to be hungry. The only joy in eating comes from hunger. Everything is hungry, but not everything eats. That's the privilege of the strong over the weak. All my small, innocent things were weak. They didn't want me to eat them, but if they didn't want to be eaten, then they should have learned to eat. If you're not following my office drama, this won't make sense, so skip on out. After that interview, I took the longest, hottest shower I've ever had. Even though I scrubbed my skin until it was raw, and still didn't feel clean, then I found my boss, Charlie, and told him I wanted to see Christoph. It's been almost a week. Is he still in Ward 2? No, Ward 3. The look he gave me was almost funny. Do you not know what's in Ward 3? No, well, rest assured, Christoph's not in Ward 3. Then where is he? He hesitated. He's exactly where he asked to be. Which is? Look, we did what you asked. We offered to let him work here in the Pantheon with you. And he is who he is. What does that mean? It means when presented with a choice between the Pantheon, Ward 2, and his usual status quo. He chose his status quo. So he's back out in the field already? No. He's downstairs in reconditioning. I don't know why, because I don't even like Christoph, but that made my chest ache. I don't believe you. He sighed. When Christoph experiences strong attachment, his ability to complete his work suffers to the point of failure. When he's happy, his teeth fall out. When his teeth fall out, he stops being a monster. That's what you mean, right? He can't be happy because he's useless to you when he's happy. Would you honestly say that you've seen him happy at any point since you met? That shut me down pretty hard. The problem isn't that he's happy. The problem is his need for approval. When Christoph wants approval that he feels he isn't receiving, he adjusts his behavior. Everything he's doing, the mellowing, the teeth, all that, is a slow and incredibly awkward adjustment to what he thinks you want. How does accepting reconditioning fit into that? When he developed his attachment, his need for approval from you shot into the stratosphere. He wants to be what you want him to be. But he also hates that tendency in himself. It's a very dramatic push-pull scenario with lots of emotional whiplash. Recently, he decided that returning to fieldwork is in his best interest after accepting that he's not going to get what he wants from you. What does he want from me? Exactly what he told you. He perceives you as his most important someone, and he wants you to perceive him as yours. Of course, it's not a reasonable, fair, or healthy expectation, which he recognizes. But just because you recognize something doesn't mean it doesn't affect you, and this is really affecting him. So you're saying this is all my fault? There's no fault here. This is the best outcome for Christoph, the agency, and you. We went around in circles for a while before I finally stormed off. Anyway, long story short, fuck these people. Fuck Charlie in particular. I don't believe a word he said. I'm breaking Christoph out tonight.